Hi class, I just wanted to talk to you briefly about Chapter 4, which is what you're getting into this week. Chapter 4 covers the basic tissues of the body, so what I have here, I have in my lap is your textbook, and I'm going to be going through page by page and pointing out specifics and kind of talking to you about how to study, what I'll be looking for, how I would test you on certain topics, as well as, as I mentioned, giving you some study pointers and how best to review and prepare for any assessments that you'll have in this class. So to start out basically with the different tissues, you'll see a nice little basic drawing on page 111, just showing you the basics of what tissues are. There's also a clinical impact box on page 112 that goes through the details of microscopic imaging and how they use electron microscopes, etc., etc. All of those things are possible test questions on your unit exam. So make sure that you are taking the time to read those sections. I remember when I was a college student, I would see those kind of extra boxes and I would think, sweet, that's something I don't have to read. But make sure you read those and take some time. I did make a reading guide for every chapter in the book, and I made those specifically to help you pull out the important information. So I strongly encourage you to use those to not only help you read through the chapters, which can be very, very long and tedious, but to also go back and review and help you prepare for the weekly quizzes as well as the unit exams that are occasionally through this semester. So the first section is on epithelial tissues, which I do have the Taggery lecture, which goes through all the types of epithelial tissues. I'm sure Dr. Anson will cover extensively the different types of tissues, and you'll be experiencing them and checking them out in lab as well. There are some great diagrams in your textbook on where these are, what they do, how they're shaped, etc. I have what has been a very successful study strategy for students when they're studying these types of tissues. Firstly, I will say that I'm not going to give you any diagrams on any of your tests. So if and when you go to take your exams, you will experience multiple choice after multiple choice after multiple choice and a few essay and case study questions. I will explain the format of your exams once we get closer to the exam date, but there will not be any diagrams or any pictures to label or anything like that. But it is important for you to understand what these things look like so you can understand how they work. So I strongly suggest doing the following, and this may or may not help for lab depending on how your lab instructor chooses to test you. But I suggest having a sheet of paper, folding it in 3 columns. Right? You have one column for the type of tissue, so it's a simple squamous. And then in the middle, you would have what simple squamous is. It's just one single layer thick of flat cells, right? And then on this side, you could have where it is in the body or how its structure meets the function. So something that's thin and single layered would be great for diffusing things across, allowing for exchange, and that's exactly what you find in the capillaries of your body, as well as the velar capillaries of the lungs, etc. So that would be an example of how I would take the information from the text and turn it into a study tool to help me prepare for any assessments. So you have a couple pages of all of that with just the epithelial tissue, and then you get to page 118, which has a nice chart. The chart on page 118 goes through all of the different functions, such as diffusion, filtration, mucus, etc., and what types of tissues perform those functions. It's very important that you understand the relationship between structure and function. In other words, why wouldn't the cells of your skin out here on your outer epithelium, why wouldn't this be covered in simple cuboidal? Well, cuboidal are big and squishy, they're more for absorbing or secreting. It just has to go back to form meeting function, whereas if you have nice flat cells that are covering each other layer upon layer, it's going to create a better protective barrier. So that's the first section there on epithelial tissue. Along with epithelial tissue, you get into glands, all of those sebaceous glands and simple alveolar glands and coiled tubular glands, etc., which are all secreting onto epithelial surfaces, lining our gut, lining our mucous membranes, lining on our skin, etc. So it is important for you to understand where these structures are and why they're important and shaped the way they are. Next, you get to connective tissue. The big difference between epithelial tissue and connective tissue is the fact that connective tissue has lots of non-living things or non-cellular things associated with it, whereas when you're talking about epithelial tissue, you're straight up talking about a type of cell that's connected to other cells, right? A covering or a lining. That's what epithelial tissue is. When you get to connective tissues, it's kind of like outer space, where you have bits and pieces of cells and then all of this other stuff in between. So understanding the different types of connective tissue is very important, and all of the different accessories in connective tissue, all the different fibers, different types of cells that are there, etc. And connective tissue is kind of a hodgepodge category. Things like bone and blood and cartilage are all lumped into this one category called connective tissue. So it's important to understand why these things, though seemingly very, very different, are all kind of the same in their basic composition. So that's an important underlining fact there. Then eventually coming into flipping around, page 134, you get to all the different types of muscle. There's 3 types of muscle. It's very important that you understand the difference between all 3 types. I will tell you we're mostly going to focus on the cardiac muscle and the skeletal muscle. This semester we're really just focusing on skeletal muscle. Next semester you'll focus on the cardiac muscle and the smooth muscle as we go through the digestive tract and the cardiovascular system. So keep that in mind. The majority of the muscles that we'll be talking about this semester are just the skeletal muscles. Then finally we get to nervous tissue, and we'll cover nervous tissue much more extensively when we get to the actual chapters on the nervous system later on in this semester. There's a little bit on tissue damage and inflammation, and it's very important that you understand that process, the process of tissue repair, how the clot forms and how the scab forms, and the role of fibroblasts and fibrocytes in forming the scar tissue. All very, very important. And finally, just about every chapter in your textbook will end with the effects of aging on the section of the body, in this case on tissues. So how the fibroblasts no longer secrete all the different fibers, and just the overall metabolism of cells is degrading over time. At the end of the chapter, there are several different things that you can use to help you study. First, there's a summary that covers everything. It's basically an outline, kind of like the outline notes that I provide for you in the chapter sections. So you'll see that summary there. It would be a great tool for those of you who are very auditory, to maybe record yourself saying these over and over again. For those of you that need to be active when you're reading or studying, maybe take these little pieces of summary and see if you can kind of sing them to a tune, or just rewrite them over and over and over again. So that's one strategy that you can use with that summary section. I strongly suggest you using the reading guide, because that kind of does the same thing, and it helps you be active as well. There's also review and comprehension questions at the end of every section. These review and comprehension questions, the answers are right in the back of the book. That's easy peasy lemon squeezy. You read the questions, you answer them, you check them out. You can also check out the textbook website and all of the practice that's on there for practice quizzes and flashcards and all of that as well. The very last section has critical thinking questions. These answers are also an appendix at the back of the book. I strongly suggest taking these critical thinking questions and answering them, especially before your unit exam. Your unit exam, as I mentioned, will have case study questions on them. They're basically critical thinking / real world type questions, and some of them may be very similar to what you see here in this critical thinking section of the textbook. So for every chapter this semester, I'm going to upload a video similar to this, where I kind of give you an overview, a little preview of the chapter, point out some things, kind of help you how to study, help you see how to study certain topics, and hopefully address any misconceptions. This chapter is very straightforward. There's not a whole lot of questioning going on here. It's really just memorizing the different types of tissues, where they are, what they do, and what they're made of. So good luck studying Chapter 4, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.